we are recording right now, and on the phone right now is Parker VanBlaricom, youth pastor at the Life Church in Memphis, Tennessee. How are you doing, my man?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I miss all that's going on, but hey, things could be worse, I guess. But
That's
uh,
true.
just want to start things off with the topic of sports. Just kind of dive in a little bit, trying to get your thoughts and opinions that not all characters that you can fit into your Twitter sphere, but just want to give you the chance to probably whatever questions I have, I'll probably shoot your way and then get your nice insights and opinions on everything Memphis Grizzlies. Is that
Okay,
okay?
go for it.
All right. With the season being that it is, especially with it just all saying on halt mode right now, where do you set the Memphis Grizzlies season right now? If it were to pick up today, and if we were to start playoffs today, how would you feel about the team going forward?
Well, I think my perspective on the season was it was pretty much a developmental year, and any amount of success that they had was pretty much bonus and gravy. And so the fact that they've been competitive at the very least, and even in the playoff hunt, is pretty amazing. So I've already considered the season a success, even if they were to fall out of the playoffs. Like if the season would have never gotten shut down, and they would have fallen out of the playoffs, I think just the amount of games that they've won, the level at which Ja Morant has played, some of the trades that they made, the young pieces that they have, the future is pretty bright, and I think this season was about establishing that. So in general, that's kind of the basis how I see the season. Now, if it were to pick up right now, and who knows what's going to happen? They may start directly with the playoffs. They may play a few games. Who knows what they're going to do? I think if they were to make it into the playoffs, there's a pretty good chance they would get swept in the first round. Maybe they take a game because they're going to be playing the Lakers, and I think it's a pretty tough matchup for us just because of even the size that they have, and it's going to be hard for Ja to score in the paint against those guys just because they got Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee, and then got LeBron James, a lot of big bodies that they have to throw at Morant, who thrives on getting in the paint. So it's not a great matchup for us. So if we were to make the playoffs and the season were to resume, it would be fun from the standpoint of it'd be great just to see basketball again, and specifically Memphis Grizzlies basketball again. But my expectations wouldn't be high. Like I said, I think the season's already a success because Ja Morant's really good, because our team's been better than everyone expected earlier, and we've got a lot of young pieces to look forward to. One wild card that I would really be excited about is just being able to see Justice Winslow for the first time, who we gave up a lot for. We traded it was a pretty massive trade to get Justice Winslow. So we haven't seen him play yet, and so to see him on the court would be really interesting. And that would probably be the most interesting part of the season continuing, is just getting to see what he looks like sitting next to Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson, and the rest of the young squad. So in general, I'm pretty happy about the Grizzlies season. It's a bummer that it had to, that we had to hit this pandemic the way we did, because it kind of interrupted a pretty exciting season for them. But in general, they weren't going to win a championship this year, so I'm not that bummed. And if anything, I'm just more excited about next season and the season after that.
And you're not the only one to say that the Memphis Grizzlies would get swept in the playoffs. Like, you're not alone in that boat. But I've seen in the past, even though it's different players, different coaches, different time, where someone would doubt the Memphis Grizzlies. Like, you know all too well what happened in that 2010 or 2011 postseason run against the San Antonio Spurs, 1-8, and that's what actually got me hooked into being a Grizzlies fan. And that I could give you a legitimate argument, and you might dismiss me, but everyone else has. But I'll just put it for you. I'll put it to you this way: point guard wise, there's no one outside, unless you put LeBron James on Ja Morant. There's no point guard on the Lakers that can contain him. Essentially, now you go to the shooting guards. You got Dylan Brooks. Yes, you can put Danny Green or whoever, or Avery Bradley if you wanted to for defensive purposes. I mean, you probably give that little edge to the Lakers, but you can legitimately make a case for Dylan Brooks that he can handle his one-on-one matchup. And then obviously, like LeBron, like at the 4, there's no containing him. Now you get to that. Now you get to that 5 spot. Before I get to Anthony Davis, you get to that 5 spot with Giannis Valanciunas, who is a rebounding machine, and that is key to getting the ball from teams like the Warriors when they're shooting threes like crazy, or the Lakers, or the Clippers, or the Bucks, where they just want to run up and down the court on you and get in the paint. When you got Giannis down there, who can not only shoot but distribute and rebound the ball against like Dwight Howard or Shaqtin' a Fool, JaVale McGee, or DeMarcus Cousins on his 3th, 4th, 5th torn Achilles right now. I mean, you seriously could not convince me that Giannis Valanciunas couldn't handle his matchup. And then you get to the 4th matchup with Anthony Davis and Jaren Jackson Jr., to where you could if you had a gun pointed at my head and saying, like, who are you taking, Anthony or Jaren? I'm obviously taking like Anthony, but that's not to say that Jaren couldn't give him any fits down the paint, especially last year in the limited time we did see him in New Orleans versus Jaren Jackson during his rookie year. He gave Anthony Davis some fits. And there's also the factor of, now I know there's been a big layoff with the season, but if you look at that last matchup against the Grizzlies and the Lakers in Memphis, yes, it was the 4th game, and maybe the Lakers didn't need it as much as they did. Number 1 seed they are. But you look at how we won that game without most of our players because of injuries. Now if we were to so to speak jump into the postseason, like all hands on deck essentially with the Memphis Grizzlies and the Lakers. There's not many big injuries to speak of, if any at all. Any big injuries outside of maybe LeBron's like nagging groin from last season ago. But if I were to place a few bets or something, I would give the Grizzlies. It would go like this if we were to meet in the playoffs. It would be the Lakers take game 1, then the Grizzlies would take game 2, just slightly, and then the wild card would be game 3, as is with most Grizzlies matchups over the past few years, where you could legitimately see the NBA realm go up in flames if the Grizzlies go up 2-1, and then everyone's like, what the hell's going on with the Lakers? Like, LeBron, what the hell are you doing? To where come game 4, 5, and 6, LeBron, like either by Frank Vogel's choice or LeBron's choice, to where it's like, okay, because I think if we're going to win 2 games, which I honestly think we can, it's going to be because of John Morant and the sheer will that he has carrying this team this year. So I'm thinking we win 2 games, and then after game 3, LeBron is going to be put on John Morant, and then they'll just win out from the rest of there. Then they'll win the series 4-2, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think those are fair points. I think the difference is when you get to the playoffs, and the difference between this team and the team in the past that has made some of these runs is just experience. The playoffs are such a different type of game than the regular season, and we don't have a single guy, really, a key player on our roster who has legitimate, playoff experience. And so, and you're talking about, like, you can go matchup by matchup, and sure, maybe the Grizzlies could win a couple of those different matchups, but the fact that the Lakers have the 2 best players on the court by a large margin. I mean, not saying that John Morant or Jaren Jackson couldn't be that good eventually, but right now, I mean, you would take LeBron James and Anthony Davis just as a player over anybody on the Grizzlies roster, and those 2 guys alone, I think when the playoffs, when it matters, when it counts the most, you're not going to catch them like being lazy or not trying hard. They're going to go all out. And so I think what would probably happen is I think the Lakers would probably win game 1 and game 2, and then maybe the Grizzlies could sneak out game 3 at home with the full arena at the FedEx Forum. Maybe there's the hype and the emotion, they could win a close game, and then the Lakers would close them out game 4 and 5 after that. So
that's feasible.
I would say best case scenario in my mind would be the Lakers win 4-1. But I'd love to be surprised. I just don't think it's realistic this year, and I think that's okay. I think the expectations can't be you should win 2 games. I think if they won 1 game, that would be a huge success considering how young and inexperienced they are.
Yeah.
And the team they're going against is probably the favorite to win the championship.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, also to add on top of that, that's also a feasible point, and also a feasible point towards my argument is that every single matchup we've had outside of I think game 1 against the Lakers, which was pretty much a blowout essentially. But game 2 in Memphis, when we had those throwback Vancouver jerseys on, it was just one flipping point that we just missed it by. Like while they were riding high on their win streak, and we were just picking up, and we were just trying to figure out what we were doing. And we still had Jay Crowder on the team, and like Ja Morant, even though he was having the minute restrictions, because the unwritten rule of having minute restrictions for a rookie, which I still don't understand these days, but I get it. But it is what it was. But there's feasible credence there that not only does yes, Memphis doesn't have the experience for playoff wise, but you look at the Lakers, like outside of the obvious, like big goat in the room that is LeBron James. All you have is Dwight Howard, who carried the Orlando Magic team so many years ago. It seems like ancient history against the Lakers, which he got swept, by the way. And then you have JaVale McGee, who rode the coattails of the Golden State Warriors, essentially, of Steph Curry, Klay, and Kevin Durant, and Draymond Green. And then you go down the roster after that, like what experience is there on their part? So,
well, they've got Danny Green.
Danny Green, Danny Green with the Raptors last year.
Even Anthony Davis has had some playoff series. Obviously, he hasn't had a ton of experience. That's why he left New Orleans. But any experience is better than none, just because it's such a different game. Every NBA player says the same thing, that when you get to the playoffs, the defense is more intense, the energy is more intense, everyone's more locked in, and so it's a little hard to compare a regular season game just any given night of the week when the Grizzlies are in LA or the Lakers are in Memphis. It's just hard to compare that and use those results as any kind of indicator of what would happen in the playoffs, because the playoffs are such a different game. Now, the wild card is there's a lot of young, super raw, talented players on the Grizzlies who any given night could explode and have an incredible night. However, I think expecting that would be unfair because I don't think it's likely to happen. But who knows? I would be happy just to watch, even if they got in the playoffs and lost 4 straight games by 20 points. I'd love to see just more basketball anyway.
Yeah, and just right off that last part, just seeing basketball. What was your first reaction when you first heard the news that Rudy Gobert and others had COVID-19 and tested positive? Like, what was your reaction when you first heard that not only that the NBA, they were actually one of the first leagues to do it, to shut down the leagues because of COVID-19. What was your reaction when it just all hit you at once?
Well, I think, leading up to that night, there was already a lot of talk about taking fans out of stadiums. I remember even listening to the radio here locally, and 2 nights before that, I think the Grizzlies had a home game, and
against the Magic,
and a lot of people, and a lot of people were saying, "Is this going to be the last game that Memphis fans get to go see in person for the rest of the season?" They were talking like it was potentially the end of fans in the stadium, so that you knew something might happen. But then what was funny was we had our youth group was going on that night, and I had just gotten done preaching a message. I came off the stage to a bunch of notifications about it, and then started reading it and found out, they were shutting it down. And I think even when it initially happened, it seemed like to me, at least in my mind, I was like, oh, well, they're going to have to shut this down for a minute, get everything back under control, delay the season for a couple weeks, and then pick it back up. Obviously, I don't think anyone expected it to unravel the way it did, both in the NBA and even across the country, just how quickly everything shut down and how intensely everything shut down. And now I think there's a real possibility they don't finish the season. I think that's still up in the air. I'm hopeful that maybe they could figure out some sort of system where they could play games with no fans. Even that would be better than nothing. But I think my reaction was, my specific reaction about Rudy Gobert was, at first it was kind of funny, because if you remember, the night before he had been rubbing all the microphones and kind of making fun of the whole thing. And so for him to be the one that got it, I was like, man, that's a bad look for Rudy Gobert. But initially, I was obviously surprised, just like everybody else. But I think when my first thought about it, I didn't realize how big of a deal it was until much later.
Yeah, because there's talks that with Texas opening up, being one of the first states to be able to reopen their economy for what was being touted at the task force with President Trump and the doctors given their blessing to it with the 3 phases, which essentially phase 1, we open back up, and then phase 3, we're all out of it essentially, and we're back to back to normalcy. But with you do have like out there the MLBs working on a league bubble out in Arizona. There's talks about the NBA having their own bubble in Las Vegas, considering like we've had the summer leagues there, and that essentially we would start the playoffs, in my opinion, like straight on, and then have all 16 teams in hotels and practice facilities, and then like commence the games from there. Like, I mean, just to salvage anything from the season, because I do not think, unless you are going to compromise the following season, you're not going to resume any regular season games, in my opinion. I think it's all. Yeah, it's all.
I think the reason they would try to finish is, one, they're not making any money right now. They need the revenue, and then 2, just from the standpoint of like think about a team like the Lakers, for example, or really any team. You think about the Milwaukee Bucks, who have Giannis Antetokounmpo is about to be a free agent next year, and they were the favorite in the East, had a chance to win the title. To take this season away from them makes it that much more of a risk that Giannis could leave. There's so many implications for not finishing the season, at least giving teams that are good a chance to finish out and see if they can win the championship. Mm-hmm. That messes up so much stuff for the future that I feel like they're going to try to get it done, even if it means they push back next season to start in December or something, which I think is a real possibility at this point, just because they're going to have to make up so much time. And I think, and on the bubble city thing, I saw Adam Silver said the other day that he had talked about that and they had heard that proposal, but he wasn't seriously considering it. So unless something changes, it doesn't seem like that's going to be the avenue. I think the avenue that it sounded like Adam Silver was waiting on was just more testing. I mean, that's what he said. He said if we can get to the point where we can test all these guys on a regular basis, then he would feel better about starting. But who knows? It changes every day, and it changes so fast that you never really know how it's going to play out.
But yeah, it will be interesting to see how the economy opens back up with Texas, and shoot, even states like Tennessee is rumored to be part of those states to be reopening back on May 1st. So, and trying to something else to talk with you about with this COVID-19. You being a youth pastor, when you heard that the churches were no longer viable per se to go in person, like what was was there any pushback from people over there that say like, no, we shouldn't close the church at all, or like we should just maybe just do the best we can with 6 feet social distancing while keeping the church open? Take me behind the scenes. You being a youth pastor. Sure. At the Lear there, what was the process going through?
Well, it was interesting because when the NBA shut down and all that stuff broke out, I think that was a Wednesday night. Mm-hmm. At that point, it was still in our county, Shelby County in Tennessee, when we got to the weekend, that particular weekend, not a single case in our entire county, and only 7 cases in the entire state of Tennessee, and they were all in Nashville area. So we had church that weekend. We had some extra hand sanitizer, and we, didn't do meet and greet, and we took some of those precautions to help people. We spread out the chairs a little bit, not 6 feet, but spread them out a few inches just to give people a little more space. But it didn't even register for most people at that time because nobody in the county even had it. And so we had church that weekend, but then the very next day, that Monday after that weekend, was when the CDC put out the recommendation that you don't have any gatherings of more than 250 people for the next 8 weeks. Now, for us, that would mean that pretty much all of our regular weekend services wouldn't be able to happen because we have more than that many in the building. So what we did, and I'm thankful that, our pastor, John Siebling, he came in. We came in Monday, and we met, about 10 to 12 of us, kind of our lead team, and we sat down and said, all right, it's pretty obvious that we're going to have to not have services in person this next weekend. We didn't really question it or fight it. We just said, you know what, let's just accept it, because it was clear that it was only going to snowball at that point. I mean, more and more people were talking about it. More and more people were getting it. Every day that went by, the fear increased, the hype kind of increased. And so it was inevitable. We knew that services would at least have to be canceled for the next weekend. And so instead of just trying to say, you know what, let's get through this weekend and then figure it out, we went into kind of a battle plan where we decided, you know what, let's just plan and let's come up with a plan this week just in case this thing goes on for months. Let's just pretend that we're not going to be able to meet in our physical building for like, I don't know, 2-3 months. Who knew? At that time, it seemed crazy to think that was possible. Mm-hmm. At that time, it felt like it was only going to be a week or two, and then we'd be back. But we decided, you know what? Let's not take any chances. Let's go ahead and plan like this is going to be a long-term thing, so we can be the most effective. And so, from that moment on, we got to work on coming up with a strategy for, serving, a strategy for life groups or small groups, a strategy for online services and staying connected with people, and how to keep everybody engaged. Like we kind of spent the next 48 hours and came up with a kind of a plan and then rolled it out. And then we've basically been in that plan ever since. And so there wasn't a ton of pushback. I think at first there was a little bit of disappointment, obviously, because, everyone loves being in church and being around each other and seeing each other. And so there was initial disappointment and maybe a little bit of I don't know what this means. What is this going to mean for our church? What is this going to mean for the church in the whole country? Who knew? It was kind of an uncertain kind of feeling. But we decided to just stop focusing on the uncertainty and focus on what we did know. And that was that, okay, we're not going to be meeting in our building. So how do we make it the best we can make it with what we have? And so then we started working on it. And I'd say, as much as we'd like to have services in our buildings, the last 5 weeks that we haven't have been, as good as they can be. I think they've been pretty good for us. So, but to answer the question, there wasn't a strong pushback. And we were on the phone with a lot of large churches, both in the city of Memphis and around the country, just getting an idea of what everybody was doing, so we could be on the same page. And once the other larger churches, there's a handful of them in Memphis, we kind of all decided it was obvious, okay, we need to close our doors.
Mm-hmm. So because it was interesting being unforeseeable that we actually went Easter without a mass congregation, which is pretty crazy to think about. And the online services that's been done there and elsewhere, like here with Wave Church, for me and my wife to be able to just be in our living room, let alone even though our couch is so comfortable, it's still the thought of it. It's so weird that we had Easter, which is where you get your most gathered congregations all year, just go up in flames. But another thing that actually was actually intriguing to me is with tithing or giving or offerings. Has any of that been that you know of been slowed down or not as much, or they're still given as much, if not more, given the circumstances?
Yeah, so you cut out there for a little bit, but I heard the last part of the question. In terms of giving, obviously that's one of the main concerns for a church that can't meet in person is financially surviving. I mean, not just you got to think about it like this. Most churches are similar to a small business. They have employees that they have to pay salaries to, health insurance. They have buildings that they have to pay the bills on, and lighting, and all these different things, right, that they go into church, not to mention all the outreach and helping people that are in the city that are in need, especially during something that's difficult. So the financial need is still there. And, I think some people forget that it's not like when the church is asking people to give in the middle of a crisis. It's for a lot of reasons. One, we believe, like the Bible says, that it's a sign that you trust God. But two, it helps a church survive, and not just survive. In our mind, we want to thrive and make a difference in our city. So, I think to answer your question, to be totally honest with you, our finances have been really good. Our church has rallied and been really generous. And we've had some really strong weekends. And obviously there's people in our church that are affected. Some of them have lost their job and they don't have an income. And so when you don't have an income, there's very little you can do financially. But there are some in our church that are doing better than normal. I mean, that's the thing about stuff like this is everybody's affected differently. I mean, there's some, think about it, for example, everybody's using these Zoom calls, Zoom conference call type things. And most people didn't even know what Zoom was 2 months ago, but now it's a household name. Everybody knows what Zoom is because everyone's using it. So I imagine the people working at Zoom are doing very well, right? And so you can take that example and apply it to a lot of different businesses and a lot of different people. Some are struggling, no doubt, and we're trying to help them. But some are doing really well, and so the people in our church that are doing really, really well are leaning in a little more and being extra generous because they know that we're going to use that money to make a difference. And so far, since this whole thing started, and we tell our church this so they understand, we're not just like storing up money for the heck of it. We're putting it to use. We've given away over 500,000 meals in Memphis since this thing started. So in about 5 weeks, we've given out over 500,000 meals. And that alone is obviously pretty significant. Not to mention, I mean, we've been feeding all of our nurses and doctors pretty much for the last week. Every meal, every day, we've been buying food from local restaurants in our city who are closed, and so we're supporting them. And then they're taking the money from us, making the meals, and then we're taking the meals from them and delivering them to all the nurses and doctors that are still working right now, who are considered, essential. And so I guess my point is we try our best as a church to show our congregation and the people in our church that we're not just storing up money and asking you to give because we want you to give or because we need money, but because we want to make a difference in our city. And I think most people recognize that, and that's why they're generous, is because they know we're making a difference in our city. And so they rally around. A lot of times when stuff gets more difficult, generous church rallies even more and gives even more so that they can continue to be the church, in the city. And so I think that's been a cool thing that's happened in this whole thing, is just the level of outreach and generosity has really gone to another level in our church. So I know there's some churches probably that are struggling. I imagine a lot are because it's a difficult season, just like a lot of people are struggling. Yeah. But our church in particular has done really well.
Yeah, just to kind of veer into a little bit, amidst of all the things to happen, especially with this outbreak and whatnot. What was your feedback? I mean, not feedback. What was your reaction when you heard the tornadoes that hit in the Nashville upper, North Germantown, Nashville area, 615 area code area? If any friends or church friends that the Life Church or you have up there personally, what was your reaction in terms of when that happened amidst all of this going on? Oh, and on top of everything, essentially, not many people could. I mean, given the circumstances, Life Church has a big outreach program with your surf trucks and whatnot. But were there any limitations, or are there any limitations in terms of when you go out to the community, or if someone from Nashville gave you all a call, were you able to help them out a little bit?
Yeah, no. So when that happened, obviously it was heartbreaking, just like any time something like that happens. And I did know people that I don't know anybody personally that, had lost their house or lost their life, but definitely friends that posted on social media, this is, one street down from me and it was a lot of damage. But what's interesting is when that happened here, our state wasn't in any kind of shelter at home policy yet. So we technically weren't quite at the level we are now. So you could leave the house and a lot of people were still working. It was in that no social gatherings over 10. So we were trying not to have more than 10 people. So to answer your question, we sent a couple teams to Nashville right away. And the timing of it was actually really interesting because I think, if I remember correctly, the tornadoes happened and we had a bunch of people sign up to go on this trip. And then the kind of mandate came down that you didn't want to have any groups of more than 10 people together. So we had to trim the team. We had more than 10 people sign up for the team. So we broke it down a little bit and ended up sending 2 teams of about 10-ish to Nashville to help with the relief. And And so there are some limitations. Obviously, you can't take as many people as you might want, and sometimes when you're serving, you got to use some masks. When we serve now in the community, we've limited the amount of people that can serve pretty much to just our staff. Whereas normally we would say anybody in our church that wants to come volunteer and help serve, you can come. But because of the limitations and the stay-at-home order and kind of the lack of freedom to get more than 10 people together and the social distancing and all that, it's just been simpler for us to say we're only going to staff the outreaches with our actual staff. And so the main avenue we're doing that right now is we have 2 dream centers, which are kind of our local hubs of outreach. Mm-hmm. We basically do food lines where we pack up groceries and pack them into boxes and bags, and then we have cars drive on the lot throughout the day, and we're just putting the groceries in their trunk, basically. So all of our team has gloves and masks, and nobody gets out of their car. They just basically pull onto the lot, and we load the groceries in their back trunk, and then they leave the lot, and we just kind of go through family after family a few days a week. So it's definitely impacted maybe how we serve or how interactive we can be, but we're still making it happen. We've got some kind of a little bit of assurance from our mayor that it's okay for us to both serve the community. They actually have asked us to serve our community because our community needs it. And we've actually partnered and helped 14 other churches in our city set up their own mobile food pantries so that basically we can distribute, just kind of spread the load a little bit across the city so not everybody's coming to our church get it. And then he's also given us a little bit of like a assurance that it's okay for us a few of us to gather at church to record messages and go online and all that kind of stuff. So we've had some freedom, but obviously like everybody else, we're restricted in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And to go off your point, to have your mayor of Memphis and whatnot to give you the support, and the church support is probably bigger than you probably even realize, considering how many other mayors or governors are handling their states nationwide, whether it be through no fault of their own or them flexing their muscles a little bit politically, which unfortunately in this climate, no matter how you feel about this, like how I feel or how you feel about COVID-19, it's a nationwide, like it should be a nationwide, us all come together, not flexing our muscles about like, you can't do this, but you can do that, which contradicts that and whatnot. But you as a youth pastor, when you hear mayors like Mayor de Blasio essentially calling out the church in New York, saying that if they violate any of the COVID-19 rules that they have in place, that he says that he has the power to shut down the church permanently, essentially, of whoever's in contrast of the rules. Like, how's that make you feel as a youth pastor when you hear other mayors or governors say stuff like that about the church?
Yeah, I haven't seen that particular comment, but I know there's been some controversy about some of this stuff. And what's interesting is it's such a tricky subject right now because I think obviously everyone knows there is a freedom of religion and a freedom to assemble, and that's all part of our country. And so everyone knows that. I think the challenge is that we're kind of all trying to work together and give each other the benefit of the doubt here and try to get over this pandemic and get through it. And so everyone's like, okay, we'll shut down for a little bit so that we can get through this. But I do think there is some sort of expectation amongst churches and probably a lot of businesses and people in general that this is not supposed to be a permanent thing. This is a temporary solution to fix something that was unexpected. Mm-hmm. But it can't drag on forever, right? We can't lock ourselves in our houses for the next 5 years until no more diseases go around. That's unrealistic. So what's interesting, though, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but there was a church in Florida mm-hmm. who ended up having services. I don't know if you saw any of this, but yeah, he pushed through and had services, and they came and arrested him. And but what's actually even more interesting is after he got out on bail, they sued the sheriff of that town and said that they violated their constitutional rights, and they won the case. and it was overturned, and that county had to give them permission if they wanted to meet. And I think if anybody really pushed, I think the Constitution would probably protect any churches, even if they did violate some of the mandates of their town. Not saying that's wise or that they should do that, but if they did and push came to shove, I think the majority of the time they would probably end up winning in court simply because that Constitution is a pretty hard and fast thing. It's hard to – the language is pretty clear in there that you can't restrict people to meet, especially for religious services. So anyways, everybody's got their own stance, and I think the difference between some people see the church as a luxury, other people see the church as a necessity. And so if you see the church as a luxury, you're going to say, well, it's no big deal, just shut down. Who cares? But if you see the church as an essential, as a necessity, then you recognize that it can't be shut down forever because there's a need and it's important. So, I don't know the particular comment you're talking about, but I'm sure there's lots of people that agree that say you need to shut down. And honestly, they probably should, especially in New York, where it is even more dangerous right now. You just look at the sheer numbers of people.
Yeah, ground zero.
And I know people in New York who have gotten the disease, and people I know pastors up there who had people in their church have passed away from it. So it's a serious thing, but at the end of the day, eventually we are going to have to reopen because of our biblical responsibility and the protection of the Constitution. So that's kind of how I see it. And
also one more thing about COVID-19 and whatnot. How are you and Bren and Leo, your newborn, not newborn, he's well over 1 year old, I believe. He's how is it at your household dealing with all this? Have you stocked up on toilet paper, or is it Bren, your wife, pushing you to buy stuff quickly from the stores when all this went down?
I came home from work one day and I was like, you know what, everybody's freaking out. I should probably go to the store and get some stuff. And what's funny is, especially when it comes to food, I don't eat very healthy. I eat a lot of junk food. I eat a lot of dry food that doesn't expire, and frozen pizzas and stuff that it's not a big deal. So I could get a bunch of stuff and not have to worry about having too much because it doesn't expire. Mm-hmm. Her situation's a little different, but I would say, at least here locally, I feel like the grocery stores have done a pretty good job of staying stocked up. Initially, there was a couple days, obviously, where they were out of paper towels and toilet paper because everybody's freaking out. But they were able to restock it fairly quickly. And most of the time you go to the store now, it's not totally empty shelves, depending on the day that you go. So we're stocked up. The interesting thing that's unique to me is I'm still technically working. In fact, I'm working probably more than I usually would. It's almost more busy now just because of what's going on with church. Mm-hmm. She's not working, so she's at home all day, every day with a toddler, which is pretty difficult and draining, I think, on her. But I'm at work, working on stuff for the weekend. We do all kinds of stuff right now. We're doing online, and so I'm working. There's about a handful of us that are able to go to the office and get some stuff done. So I'm working a lot, and so it's really just her and Leo at the house. So I'm not locked in my house like most people are. I'm out and about a little bit because of my job. I'm not really going into stores very much. I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on stuff, and I don't know. We're doing fine though. It's not too crazy here. Even now in Shelby County, it's not like it's a huge outbreak of it.
So you mean to tell me that no one in your family freaked out or called you up to let you know that, hey, you need to get toilet paper, or do we need to come by the house and give you face masks and whatnot? Like my family is essentially, because I've gotten a face mask from my WTKR news job. I've got a face mask from my mother, a whole bunch of emoji face masks from my mother, and I had two custom photography face masks for my father-in-law. So I've got about 5-6 different face masks in my inventory to where I'm about to hand these out to people who need them. So you're telling me that no one in your family was calling you up freaking out when all this was going down?
Honestly, no. What's funny is I don't have a single face mask, and I don't think anybody in my family does, and maybe we should get some. But I guess Bren's side, my wife's side of the family is I think they're concerned, but they're not overly concerned. They're not freaking out about it. My parents' side, my dad he's a bit more of a conspiracy theorist, if you want to call him that. So he's a little bit more like he just he he watches YouTube videos, reads articles, and has different opinions on it. So in general, no, it's not like it's nobody's called me freaking out. I think that's more unique. I think because both sides of my family are, full of faith, not super easily scared. I think we didn't have a lot of that freaking out stuff in our family, at least.